I've already had I had a client in America, and we would meet in essentially a VR computer game, and we would have a chat, and then it's like you sort of like, it's called Rec Room, and there's all these different activities. So we'd be like shooting, like kind of doing like laser tag, and then we'd like have a little break at the end of the level, and be like, so anyway, with that project, and then all right, let's get played. And I remember I had the most like sort of like modern bougie, like am I like the future capitalist fat cat, where we're playing like digital, like gravity-free frisbee golf, and sort of smoking a vape pen, and it's like, oh yeah, you know, and I was like, all right, I guess this is the future. It's pretty tacky, but I dig it. But also, the world's best doctors can gather around your operating table and make decisions based on your digital twin, make decisions based on the hardware and technology, and another doctor can then tune in using robotics and telepresence. So I think that's really the key takeaway, is that it's not just one vertical in isolation. It's this increase in the ability to connect, create, and communicate. Last thing that I just wanted to get you guys thinking about is you don't have to become a VR. So I'm a VR developer designer. I learned to use these tools so that I could make this future that I could sort of see, but also wanted to, you know, inhabit and be a part of. But in the 90s, or whenever computers came out, I don't know, check the first slide. You didn't have to become a computer programmer to take advantage of that initial digitization wave, but you did have to learn how to type. And it's the same with spatial computing in general. AR, VR, you need to learn to think in 3 dimensions, you need to learn to move in 3 dimensions, and you need to learn to interact with data spatially. It is like learning to type all over again. I remember I was really frustrated with a lot of the VR stuff. I was like, oh, it's so clunky and dumb, and when are they going to make it good? Not forgetting that I was actually someone that was making it. And then I had this complete change when I saw, in the space of about 2 weeks, I saw a kid use VR and I saw a drunk person use VR. And both of them were just like inhibition free, forgetting like they didn't have this like, oh, it's got to be like this. And I had this moment, it's with Tilt Brush, and you can see she's got this, you know, this interface around it. And I thought, I'm not used to having this surrounded by this panel of functionality. And they were just like, shh, shh, shh. And it was just real. It was this incredibly complex but incredibly intuitive, really well designed spatial computing interface. And I couldn't use it because I was being a Luddite, couldn't be bothered figuring out how it worked. And I'm not saying that like next week your boss is gonna be like, all right, I need those reports in VR by Monday. But there's a good chance that, you know, if you understand, you know, spatial design tools, if you understand spatial experience design and what it means, that the next time it comes up at work, you might be like, oh, hang on, yeah, chuck on the headset, whip something up, there you go, that's yours. I don't know what people do. So the only job I know about at the moment is VR design, which is it's kind of meta because I'm like using VR to build VR. And then as any type of job, it really, like experience design, I think is something that goes across so many different industries, whether you work in training, HR, is that you firstly need to understand the capabilities of this new computing environment. If you are a trainer, if you are someone that runs a factory floor, if you are someone that does OH&S, and then you need to start planning how people interact with your systems in a completely different way. So I went from like mobile UI, UX, 2D panels, lots of squares, lots of this, lots of that. Very easy. Everything was in a little rectangle. I kind of miss it sometimes. Whereas now you need to be able to design and think about experiences that span a city, span an emotional range, and you sort of need to take notes from theatre. You need to take notes from how someone plans a rock concert, maybe. Maybe learn to draw. No. So you don't have to learn to draw. You just have to learn how to make your drawings look good. But you need to think about how people are going to interact with the systems that your workplace enables in the future in a completely different way. The first step is just try it, give it a whirl. There's a lot of stuff you can do. So, okay, cool. Just thought this is a little like little thought provoker. You don't want to be the person at the office that is like, oh, Wendy can't get into the digital metaverse again. Oh, John's deleted his universe. You know what I mean? So, and the starting point is like you need to be comfortable with spatial tools, and it's I'm not saying tomorrow, but start experimenting. While you don't have to, I know I said you don't have to build the metaverse yourself. you can start with, there are systems and engines in place. Actually, something I would recommend playing with, everyone can download it today. You can build AR experiences without a line of code, and it's free. It's Torch app, Torchapp, or maybe it's just called Torch, I don't know, but it's an app. The Torch app on Twitter, really cool. Shared my blog, so I like them. They've got good taste. No, they allow you to do like spatial AR mock-ups and concepts, sort of like the Photoshop of AR. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, cool. So you can mock up a wayfinding pathway. You could go to your boss and be like, hey, check out this. Imagine I'm walking to it. They'd be like, oh, I can't think about it. And like, here you go. So there you go. Torch app. Just put myself out of a job. You guys can all go be VR AR designers. If you want to really start playing around with like the systems and spatial computing in general, Unity is a games engine that I use, and I'm self-taught. I say it's like every day. It's like I am like a hobby train, whatever, train collector. What are they called? They make train sets, and every day I get paid to like put together like model trains because it's like so fun. It was originally made to make video games, but the fact that it's got this 3D spatial interface and it integrated with AR and VR tools really early meant that it sort of was at the forefront of indie development around spatial computing, and it's really grown apace with like the sort of enterprise demands around it. So I do most of my work in Unity, and it is something that you can like pick up and do a lot of tutorials in and play, and it's really fun. It is a bit weird and frustrating and stuff like that, but in general, like anyone can learn to code, or not code, but like play and be involved with this technical space. You just have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and just be willing to experiment and be wrong and watch stuff go wrong, and just see what happens. But otherwise, there's still plenty of ways you can get involved. Finally, I guess just thinking a little bit about at the end of it what this means, and I'm not going to like summarize it with like, so you've got to do this because 3% economy growth and you're going to get the next startup. That's probably it, and it's probably true, and you are probably maybe at the start of the J-curve of essentially the digital revolution. We're only 40 years into what is a complete and utter change in what it means to be human, and we are now at the start of the first interface change since we came up with 2D screens. The only one before that was the printing press. It is really a matter of, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, in terms of this sort of like interactive, immersive world of ambient computing that happens to be via spatial computing. I really like this idea that that's true, not because it's great or because it makes sense economically, but this idea that like humans are really a byproduct of data, and data itself is this kind of living entity that is just hungry to make more and consume more data. And if you sort of just step out of the realms of possibility and be like, okay, cool, well, let's play with that thought experiment, then anything that increases data's relationship with itself and the world is definitely going to increase exponentially. Basically, we'll always be chasing the highest bandwidth, and whether it's good or bad, and as we can see here, that's pretty high bandwidth, though like kind of unpleasant as well. So I don't really think, I don't know if it was supposed to be a talk about prepping your business for the future. I don't really think the question should be, should you prep your business for the future? Yeah, you should. You should prep your art, your culture, but also consider what kind of future you want to create with it, because the people here, the people that are at the start of the digital computing revolution, the people that are building the future are the ones that are going to decide the types of reality that we inhabit, and that impact of digital design and development on the realities that we inhabit is only going to get more and more profound. So I guess you really think about whether you want to participate in a sort of like corporate panoptic, somewhere, you know what I mean, a sort of all-encompassing corporate culture where we essentially live in these sort of sponsored digital spaces, or whether we can use this new technology and use things like open source, encryption, fight back on things like censorship and stuff like that to create, like, realize the potential of this digital technology to turn our entire world into an expression of like pure human connection and creation. Or it might end up like this, which is cool. Looks cool. So hyper reality, check it out. It's a great clip. The designer of it actually ended up as a designer for Magic Leap. Not Magic Leap, Leap Motion. Went on to Facebook Studios now, but just an incredible interaction designer and futurist. So I guess like that's really a little taste of like the dystopian timeline. They actually left my last slide, which timeline are we going to be on, off the promo for the night. So maybe they're like, don't talk about dystopian timelines. Whatever. The reality is that we're building this future and there's a lot of responsibility around it, but whether it turns out to be a sort of utopia where we're connected to each other and the earth and our cities in a way that makes our lives better, or whether we end up sort of cogs in this sort of digital mill, it's up to you, it's up to me, but I think if we put a good effort in, we can make a beautiful digital future.
What's that? Can I find it online?
Hyper reality.
Just hyper reality. I'm sure a million things will come up if I type that.
It'll be that.
It'll be that. Okay, good.
Cool. So that's me. But I think we're going to do Q&A. Jumped in right on time. But thanks very much for giving me the. So I think we're going to do Q&A. Have I gone too long? We are? See you guys. We'll let everyone shuffle out that has to go. It's all good. I know I if everyone leaves, then I'm off the hook. Fire away.
I feel like this, I think you called it the battle for the lens, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like there's so much quite frightening potential in there right now where you can incentivize that by saying, for example, free Wi-Fi, free data if you allow access to your lens, free Starbucks drink if you allow access to the lens, and as soon as you say like no access, you lose those benefits, whatever they can throw at you in terms of like offers or free directions or whatever, and it's an exchange. You give them the data and they give you the offers, etc., and your location. I feel like that's just sort of inches away, and there's so much that can be gained in terms of sort of big data with that. And it just it feels really scary, but at the same time it feels inevitable and quite beneficial on the short term level for individual consumers.
I think it's funny how much we give them without free Wi-Fi and without coffee. So we already give them our location, we already give them our wants, hopes, needs, desires, dreams, our friends, what our partner wants for a wedding ring. So I can imagine people. I imagine people, just not even cookies anymore, especially with like apps like Facebook, like actual installed apps. The amount of if you don't need cookies when you're doing your most meaningful conversations with the people you love on Facebook Messenger, for example, and you're probably never more yourself in like private messages to people, and artificial intelligence and its ability to pass that, it's only going to get better, and they're always going to have that information, and so they're going to be able to create incredibly rich profiles of nearly everything you could get from the lens as well. What's interesting with the lens battle is it's not just about it is about understanding the user, but they have a pretty good understanding of the user, though we will get a better understanding. We can see the things that are in their room and who they're hanging out with and stuff like that. But it'll be sort of like crowdsourced photogrammetry. So there's this idea of this AR cloud. I mean, with Google right now, the tools we use, you essentially scan a room every time you make an AR instance, and then that room gets uploaded, and then other people scan the room and they compare their scan of the room to that room. And so you can imagine that as people are using these AR experiences, Google's slowly cobbling together this relatively live, and the term they used was healing, mesh data about the world that is self-healing. So they've got the satellite shots and the Google car shots, but then someone snaps a photo using Google Lens to find out if something's open, and they're like, oh cool, that shot front's been updated a little bit. So this like ever-evolving digital twin of the entire world, basically. And the company that has the most rich, useful digital twin at a micro level, we already have competing digital twins in the form of maps. The company with the most useful, functional digital twin will be the company that can surface the best, most adaptive content. Mostly advertising, sadly, for now.
feel about the, when you mentioned neuromancer earlier,
Mm-hmm.
but I know that sort of environment of neuromancers a really unfolded logical conclusion of all this, where there's quite a battle going on between the corporate interests and the sort of underground hackers and whatever, who are resisting sort of what you're talking about here, this whole panopticon, corporate panopticon. How do you see that playing out in actuality in terms of the open source movement and encryption technologies and all that?
So, and this could just be where I'm at, because I've been staring at a computer for like 80 hours. I originally was like, I'll fight the resistance by like strapping on a cyber board and plugging in, and I'll be hacking the the billboards, being like, get a life, whatever. Like, I'd be really crunching some data. I actually think the resistance will be like having the cultural fabric to be able to disengage from the metaverse and have a community garden and have actual familial and community bonds together. That'll be quite a radical act in a sort of like digital metaverse. Is like, oh, are you going to the garden? You're logging off? So like I feel like the like hacking and like cyber espionage will still be very like 2D flat land. Though I can imagine things like systems infiltration. If you could if my proposition that being able to understand visualize 3D in 3D a system helps you understand it better, then you could imagine pen testing and stuff like that being done that way. Another thing that I think is really interesting with Neuromancer is that it like sort of blurs the line between like physical spaces and more abstract sort of like data-driven spaces as well. So I can imagine at the moment with like VR and AR, it's like it's very skeuomorphic. It looks like real things because it's like, I need to feel like I'm in a room. But I can imagine in the future people being so comfortable with 3D immersive environments that they do sort of interact with data directly in a sense that we can't even really comprehend because they don't need to feel like they're in a room or walking into a building to hack the system or whatever. But I do think the resistance will be found in community gardens.
So just on encryption and the privacy thing, and I suppose with sort of people realising that our data and our information is being kind of spied on.
Yep.
I imagine there'd be a sort of push for that further. Do you have any thoughts on privacy when it comes to this stuff?
Absolute nightmare, because you're essentially giving what will be like the 4 mega corporations the ability to scan your whole world and see what you're seeing. But maybe it's sort of like that. There's so much data that it becomes meaningless, sort of in a sense. Like that's not much use to anyone. I don't think. So I think there's a few things. Like the reality is that like these devices can track your gaze. They'll probably be connected to your pulse, your heart rate. That'll also be like cross-referenced depending on the systems that you use with your Facebook Messenger. So it's just like, oh well, they're always looking over there when they're talking to Jonathan, and that means they can probably buy a Coca-Cola. But then that information gets leaked, and people know where you whatever bad stuff would happen. But then it's not that different to today as well. Like if you're using a sort of like Android phone and you're using a lot of Google services, and it is really part of it's an advertising platform that gives you all this stuff for free in return for being able to understand and advertise to you. That's really all it comes down to is advertising. It's essentially been since the 80s and 90s a race for the classified dollar, as in like the dollars for classified ads, and it's a bit disheartening, and I hope that won't be what funds the world today. But then, and tomorrow. But then you look at Apple, expensive. You pay a lot for it, but your DMs, your messages in Apple aren't used for advertising or like profiling. Your heart rate stuff isn't done through a sort of paid whatever. It's like, or you pay for it. I do imagine like we saw the dystopian version of the world where the person that's on the like buggy Android phone of VR and probably has like leaked all their different, they've logged into the dodgy thing so they could get the free thing or whatever. But then I do imagine that that it will be possible to have a fairly, like an open source lockdown access to the metaverse that uses the Linux like kernel, so it's more whatever like, and I think it'll be similar to this now, essentially, in that it's like it will be a lot harder to not participate without giving a lot of who you are to the world. But I also think there'll be a lot of good trade-offs, like in the car knowing what temperature you like it, things like that. I think reality is that kind of personal privacy will probably be a thing of the past in terms of a lot of stuff that we would think is really personal, but it won't be known by people. It'll be known by these like big sort of faceless systems, I think.
And also we're just careless.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you said with Sharebox you can do a piece of art and then you go away and somebody else can work on it.
Yep.
Okay, so how did you locate that piece of art, and is there a better way of doing it in the future, or is there another way that you're thinking of doing it?
So that is the current play, is like essentially localization and persistence, and it's really hard, basically. So the way that we did it is that you were able to navigate. So when you created a space, you created essentially a trackable. It created a mesh that it then used as a reference point to anchor 3D content. That's how most AR works now. But
You had an image on the floor or something, or
it scanned the space and it turned the space into the image, basically.
Okay.
So it creates like a sort of 3D mesh. It's not an actual 3D mesh. It's like a point cloud, or I didn't do that bit. But its understanding of the space, it creates a shared anchor for AR content. But what it did, it's called cloud anchors, and you can play around with it. You could build an app like this. Let's say give yourself a week. But like using Unity, Google AR Core, and an Android phone. It's hard work, but once you get the hang of it, it's fine. It then shares that cloud mesh to the cloud, and then any other phone that scans compares it to that mesh, and then can use a common reference point based on that mesh. The way that we navigated people to it is we just used regular maps, so you could use a map to find the point where it was, and then when you scanned it, it would bring it up. So if you download it, you should be able to see a bunch of share boxes around the city. They're all on a list at the moment. The way that it's done in the future, I think it won't be, I think that is the way it'll be done for quite a while, is sort of like macro digital twin being a map that leads people to key locations, and then from there, micro digital twin being like a sort of central anchor point where you get you're able to surface world-aligned digital twin content for that space. Eventually, your phone will just be able to compare it to the global digital twin and maybe your local position to make it more efficient, and be like, oh, great, I'm in front of Domino's Pizza, let's make a big pizza jump out of it, I imagine. Any more? I think we might be last one? Yep.
Yeah. With current browsers that we have, do you think that there's a next evolution coming to support this type of content?
So Mozilla have been really pushing the WebXR project, and it is essentially a browser that is designed for VR, for augmented reality, and designed to essentially be spatial responsive, we'll call it. And I think the web is the future of spatial computing, in that we already have this huge sea of information. It's just 2D at the moment, and it already acts as an excellent way to connect people between devices, and it's super democratizing as well. So we think about, what's the battle, what's the pushback against this sort of like corporate panopticon? I got it finally. Where everything's in a walled garden app store. It's on the Facebook app. It's the web. The web is the place where people can access any type of content via any device, and it links it all together. So WebXR, I would definitely check out. It's currently a way to add VR-enabled experiences to a website, or deliver websites that are VR-enabled. So you go to it, and it's a VR experience. And they're also doing AR-related things as well. So I can really imagine you've got your browser. I don't want to predict from there, because I do see this sort of walled garden. Everything's moving to walled gardens, but I can imagine that, like the app stores and things like that. But I can imagine there being a strong sort of, if there is a resistance culture in terms of like freedom of data and stuff like that, it would be through the web. Cool.
That's it. Awesome. Good to that. Thanks, guys. Just round of applause for Sam.